to that press briefing. But before that, though, we have a doctor in the house, albeit virtually, as economist Dr. Darren Conrad returns to share his professional views on the budget just presented. Thank you for spending the time, Dr. Conrad. And in case you're not hearing me, we'll also, because I thank Dr. Conrad for actually sharing his time, because he was on looking at a forecast of the budget. And so in terms of looking at this budget entitled Resilience in the Face of a Pandemic, we'll start off by asking Dr. Darren Conrad about his forecast versus the presentation that would have just finished by the Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert. So we are looking forward to having that. We'll also, and just before we have Dr. Conrad on, we take a short break. We return with more. Stay with us.
I've been an entrepreneur since the day I was born.
Without further ado, here he is, the People's Shark, Damon John.
Damon John, the founder and CEO of Forest Bias FUBU and a panelist on Shark Tank and the author of 3 best-selling books.
An entrepreneur is somebody who thinks outside the box, and when everybody else says no, they say yes.
In 1992, Damon John was 23 years old with only 40 bucks to his name when he started FUBU, now one of the most iconic fashion brands in history.
When I started FUBU, I had to physically get up in people's face and try to sell them a shirt.
Everybody thinks you need money to make money, but you don't.
We knew we make it if we ever get on our senior.
Came from the hood. I can't design. I'm dyslexic. Got left back in 7th grade. All that didn't stop me.
The winning numbers in the National Lottery online draws for Monday, 4th October 2021. At 10:30 a.m., play with number 14, Money, Mega Bonus Ball called. Pick 2, the numbers 20 and 31 in that order. Pick 4, the numbers 4, 4, 4 and 1 in that order. At 1 p.m., play with number 12, King. Pick 2, the numbers 11 and 14 in that order. Pick 4, the numbers 3, 9, 4 and 9 in that order. And at 4 p.m., play with number 21, Mouth. Pick 2, the numbers 10 and 10, Mega Ball called. Pick 4, the numbers 9, 4, 1 and 9 in that order.
Welcome back. Introductions have already been dispensed with Dr. Darren Conrad. Your forecast on this budget versus the presentation. Where do we lie between those two ends?
I think I would say that I'm quite satisfied. I in the beginning I said I wanted to see 3 themes emerge, which would be stabilization, transformation, and diversification. And I thought that the presentation by the Minister of Finance really hit on all of those 3 key points, which would be stabilization, transformation, and diversification. Even though the theme was resilience in the face of a global pandemic, I'm consulting my notes here, which I was taking, probably more palatable, sort of succinct, and very well thought out budget presentations that I've seen, mainly because it hinted to the core of what we call in economics the Hartwig rule, which is converting energy rents into capital expenditure. And I really felt that it reflected that. One of the major issues I saw was a major I think the manufacturing sector was well. I think the energy, I felt that the culture and tourism got its fair share. And also all of the things. I wanted to see so many things, and I've seen all of them unexpected to a large extent, because I was concerned about the how we dealing with the market liberalization of the fuel system. And then I saw that the minister indicated that there would be a cap on the margins, which was critical. So that means that the gas stations are not at liberty to do whatever they feel. I also saw addressing the issue of price increases. And I must acknowledge, I initially felt that something should be done to reduce the cost of the imports. But the minister rightly indicated that, which takes me back to Econ 101, it indicated that that does not do well for our local industry. So we need to maintain that level of competitiveness. So by and large, I would say it was really well delivered, well thought out. A few inconsistencies here and there, but that notwithstanding, the understanding of there was a clarion call for certain issues to be addressed, and they were addressed in a very meaningful way, I thought.
Now, you drop some tidbits and some breadcrumbs, and you must expect me to follow them.
Right.
When you say inconsistencies, what do you refer to?
One of the inconsistencies I noted was that there was a comment about, the prices would return to post-COVID or post-supply chain disruption. We all know that upward movements in prices are sticky. So prices don't come down when they go up. They stay there. We also know that there are some items that would be zero rated in terms of the VAT. Which is great, but from the last experience when VAT went down to 12.5%, there was not any real reduction. In some areas where the transmission mechanism may not necessarily hold up to what the minister's expectations are. So I would suspect that prices, even though there would be the easing of some of the subsidies, the taxes and zero rating items, we will still see the prices remain relatively high. I noted that there was talk about restarting the wage negotiations or getting instructions to the relevant bodies to get the wage negotiations moving. That should not be something that would come up in the discussion. That should have been entrained, despite COVID or not. That was my concern in some of those areas, but by and large, satisfied.
And what's your take on the pegging of barrels of oil at $65 or US dollars?
Listen.
I hear sigh. I hear a big sigh.
We should always be on the conservative side. The challenge is that these prices are very volatile and subject to constraints that are beyond our control. Global demand. We're entering season where most countries are entering their wintry season, so there'll be an increase in demand there, so you can see that. But going forward, it remains highly volatile. Conservative side, even though global market prices may be trending upwards for right now, we do not know within 6 months where it may fall. So I think it should have been a little bit more conservative, granted that we know that our revenues are significantly lower than our expenditure, to the tune of 8.88. Look at my notes here. I have my notes, so I don't want to be misguiding anybody. But our revenues are falling short in terms of what we are earning from the energy sector. But again, I see a move from to the system where we will convert this into capital investment projects. I also know the grand move towards the digitization of everything and moving into that tech sort of exporting technology and digital technology. We have to be very, very careful in that regard, because of course there was in tandem something to support that, which is retooling and training of individuals in that regard. And of course, it spoke to the connectivity. So there was a lot of things that lined up pretty well. One of the areas that I felt that we needed to address, which I was happy that it was mentioned, is the property tax. That was mentioned. it seems like it's going to come to fruition, which is great news. The only challenge I have with that, which the minister alluded to, that it will fund municipal corporation activities. What is the formula? And I'm hoping we'll hear that in the budget debate. What is the formula for distributing the property tax revenues amongst the regional corporations? Now, that is something that gets very, very technical because it has to be formulaic based on the number of residents and the type of land available and that sort of thing. But that was good news. I only hope that we don't suffer from an implementation deficit at this point.
And one of the things that I was looking at, and it's very interesting that you say that's something that we need to be very kind of careful about or cautious about with regard to that move to digital transformation, is the fact that this takes place on the day that there was a substantial drop-off in a great many apps that people would use to communicate one way or the other. So, but at the same time, how do you think moving forward, that diversification thrust helps take us to where we need to be? And this is looking at what it is we have to play with at this point in time.
Yes, and there was mention of the partnership with the TSTT. Oh, I'm seeing that my connection is unstable, so I may be going in and out. Again, ironic that you would mention that at this point in time. But yes, we have to work on the bandwidth and our connectivity issues. I know earlier on in the program there was someone from Tobago who indicated that broadband issues, connectivity was a challenge. But the good news is, I think what happened is that COVID has, as I said earlier on, COVID has unmasked all of our problems. You know, we're talking about mask up, but COVID has unmasked all of our problems, all of our challenges. And I see some effort to address the challenges. Again, will it be implemented swiftly? I'm not sure. Because another one of the sort of issues that I had in trying to reconcile is that in the beginning, there was a positive comment about the Revenue Authority and bringing it on stream and the importance of it and giving employees who are currently in the BIR system an opportunity to either retire, transfer, or stay in public service. But on the back end, I heard that we are going to hire in 100 and change, upwards of 100 compliance officers for BIR. So are we really convinced that this is what we're going to do, or are we going to try to bolster the BIR system moving forward? So that was a mixed message for me in there. And as I said, this is really my first blush at it in terms of just hearing the comments and writing as much as I can. So those are some of the things. Fungibility, debt fungibility, or fungibility of the banking system. I mean, the banking systems are highly liquid. And now you're going to make the credit unions more liquid by way of some injections. But if confidence is not there, then we have to work on the confidence. The other issue I had was a sort of the comment on the ease of doing business, but then referring to the fact that the World Bank was going through their own internal challenges in terms of the ease of doing business measurement, which was being sort of alluded to. I don't know that, I don't have the factual information, but Minister alluded to the fact that there were investigations going on in terms of the manipulation of the results. The Statistical Institute, again, I am not certain that the remedy for fixing the problems is the creation of a new institution. The Revenue Authority, great idea. I was excited when it first came out. Now we're talking about the Statistical Institute. Well, we've had CSO for how many years? That has not worked. What is the Statistical Institute going to do different in terms of addressing the shortcomings in terms of data collection?
And I like the fact that you raised that point, because it also makes me ask the follow-on question. Is it a matter of saying, okay, well, these are taxes that we can use or create new taxes, versus saying, okay, well, these are the things that are on the books, let us implement or organize so that we collect in a manner that is greatly more efficient?
I would say that we really need to look at what our existing systems are. Can they be transformed to become more efficient? Or do we need to redesign a completely different system? Because if we're talking about the personnel, we're talking about taking personnel from one system that has not worked and putting them into another system with the expectation that that system will work. What makes the Revenue Authority different from the current Board of Inland Revenue? Are we recreating another BIR under a different name with the same inefficiencies? Expanding the reach in terms of compliance. Okay, I understand that. But then you rely on a self-reporting mechanism, which is where individuals who have small businesses are required to report their income. And you take that as what they report, but is that their actual income? So I agree with the compliance officers. Is it a case where we need a revenue authority? I applaud the idea. Or is it a case of we're going to transfer inefficiencies from one institution to another under a different name? So we need to be mindful of some of these things. And again, I would say overall, I am very optimistic with this. It was quite a long presentation, I must say, but I'm optimistic about it. But there are one or two little questions that makes me wonder, is this really going to be dealt with in a meaningful way? They talked about retraining individuals. Do we understand the propensity of individuals who want to be retrained? Yes, it's good to say that the opportunities will be there for retraining, but do we understand what do we need to do in terms of providing that retraining? So I think that there can be some sort of education for sustainable development, which is one of the goals that we should have. So yes, I would say there's a lot to talk about in this presentation. Very exciting.
And I like the fact that you talk about education, and the question sometimes is, where does this education begin? Because it seems as though by inculcation, growing up, nurture, people learn what they see, and the idea is to get something that is safe in these times. The question though is, what is safe at this point in time? When do we start to inculcate a spirit of entrepreneurship, looking and seeing what are some of those issues that need to be addressed in a way that is a little different, and have people starting to wrap their brains around saying, how can I monetize an answer to this problem? What are some of the things I need to do? What are some of the partnerships I need to have? Who are some of the people I need to connect with in order to get this done?
Yes, that's a very important point that you raised there. To a large extent, when I say we, I think that's an error that we make a lot of the times. We assume that this is how we're going to deliver this, and we assume that this is how this is going to be received, when in reality it's not necessarily received right now. We're talking about transformation, which I said was one of the themes I heard throughout the budget presentation is transformation. I heard about entrepreneurship, but are we really training individuals to engage in those activities? And it stems from not just tertiary level education. It begins at, I would say, as early as early childhood education. That is where curriculum changes have to be made. So I'm hoping that what was presented in the budget is now going to be articulated by the various ministries in terms of what their agendas are going to be in terms of providing the necessary support to facilitate the transformation, to facilitate the education of individuals in ICT, to facilitate all of the entrepreneurship activities that we're thinking about. And as I said, I mean, there were a number of things that came out. Training of small business owners in terms of their record keeping and whatnot. That is very critical. That was going on for a long time, but the pandemic, as I said, exposed that. It brought it to the light, to the fore. So now that is being addressed. So that's why I'm saying I'm very, very hopeful. And there's a step in the right direction. But I would like to see now, where does the implementation begin? The minister spoke to, having a maximum of margins. Well, we ought to have, the relevant agencies keep monitoring these things and by way of data collection. So it's important. That data collection is critical. It drives what we do as economists.
All right, and so Dr. Darren Conrad, economist, is remaining cautiously optimistic, but saying that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We return after a little bit. We are looking at resilience in the face of a pandemic, the budget presentation for 2022. Stay with us.
Line and Length, the #1 cricket program in the West Indies, is on TTT. Line and Length brings you up-to-date interviews, analysis, and highlights on the game in the region and internationally. Plus, there's an added bonus to receive a gift of gear each month with our grassroots program. Go to lineandlength.net to learn more. Line and Length in association with Massey United Insurance on TTT.
Welcome back. Dr. Darren Conrad is with us, economist, and we're looking at resilience in the face of a pandemic, the budget presentation 2022. Reminding you, though, we are also standing by for comments from Parliament, so when that starts, we take you across for that. But Dr. Conrad, in terms of, and there's someone who's been for a while, he's been saying that oil and gas, they've been supplanted by soil and grass. Looking at what it is, your three-termed stabilization, transformation, and diversification. Do you think were there any other low-hanging fruit that could have been kind of capitalized upon, or you're still hoping to hear about in the budget debate?
I think by and large, thank you, DK. I think by and large, this budget that I heard was reflective of some of the recommendations in the roadmap to recovery, which I remain confident in that roadmap to recovery because it pointed to both in their recommendations, the low-hanging fruit, as well as the long-term and medium-term and long-term measures. And I think by way of caution in terms of as the pandemic continues to unfold, the presentation took on the medium-term approach, which I think is pretty good because it gives us a time, at that point in time, 3 years out, to reflect on what was accomplished. I must say, though, that the minister in the beginning of the budget speech with great alacrity highlighted all of the grants and subsidies and transfers that were made available during the pandemic. And I would have hoped that with the same alacrity we would have heard of what we heard. It was littered a bit throughout the entire presentation in terms of what we would have accomplished based on the last budget presentation last year. But by and large, I mean, the alacrity with which I expected that to be presented, I did not hear that. But yes, putting us on the right path, yes. Some allowances that were made, and some of the things, healthcare improvements, the negotiation of the contracts with the nurses that I mentioned this morning, where some of them were, or the healthcare providers would have had only 1-year contracts. Okay, that issue has been addressed in terms of the provision of stable and steady water supply and electricity supply to underserved areas. That was addressed. Now, some persons, and I really thank the minister for giving us that history lesson on the IMF and what the IMF role is, and what we experienced when we last went through our structural adjustment program. But I would say that there should also be an opportunity for us to now take a different type of discussion in terms of what we're going to proceed on, and in terms of how it is going to be implemented. That is always my concern. It sounds pretty good. I would say also that the housing affordability issue in Trinidad has always been a challenge. The supply of housing, but we see those prices are heading north. So we want to make sure that some of these things. Now, I also would like to take this opportunity, I know I'm saying a lot, but I would like to take this opportunity to the individuals who are providers of the goods that we import and so on. The same way that measures, or the same way that increases in customs and excise duties and increases in different costs associated with bringing these products in that is passed on to the consumer. I would like to see that the reduction in some of these things, costs incurred, be passed on to the consumer as well by way of lower prices.
And looking at diversification, and when we think of things like sport, agriculture, one of the things that really, not necessarily gives me pause, but I want to focus on is how do we build value chains while trying to shorten supply lines? Is it a matter of changing interests, having better links interregionally? What are some of those things that we need to be looking at to see how we can become a little more self-sufficient? Or if not totally self-sufficient, making sure that we don't need to go as far to get something like that good or service?
I think what you're pointing to is really the value-added products that we can produce. Historically, we have been so used to exporting the raw materials, and that is what colonialism taught us. You know, you harvest the sugarcane, you export the sugarcane, you import the sugar. So we have the same thing is going on with the cocoa. We have the natural product, but we don't focus on creating that value-added product that we can export. I would say if we have such great cocoa, then why not attract the companies that produce the chocolate-based products to set up shop here? We have the human capital resources available. We have the universities available with the technology, with the R&D, research and development, and attract those companies, give them a good tax holiday, of course, to get them here. And then we can export the value-added product, but we do not need to be in business of exporting a raw material, which I was heartened to hear about some of the focusing on producing agriculture for export. That is critical because time immemorial, economic growth took place and was born out of agricultural surplus. Movement from rural to urban areas was born out of agricultural surplus. So we need to really focus on creating that agricultural surplus. In other words, feed ourselves and really export what is left over. And that way we can see some stability in there. We will see a reduction in the food import bill. We will see a significant improvement in some of the individuals who are engaging in that activity, because we have the know-how. It's just the will to engage.
And in terms of that will to engage, what are some of the things you think are needed from your perspective, your professional perspective, to grease some of those channels and make it a little easier? Because when you think of the Alliance of Rural Communities of Trinidad and Tobago, Brasso Seco, Grand Riviere, Cocoa Bell, there are people putting in the work and making products out of this chocolate that is created in Trinidad and Tobago that is winning international awards. But what are some of those things that are needed to help facilitate access to larger markets where other people can enjoy the quality that we're creating here as well?
Well, one of those things which the minister spoke about is the creation of that online space to sell the crafts products and some of the actual produce. Now, I personally am aware of a number of the things that are products that are manufactured locally, because I go to the green markets, I go to different arenas where I would see what is produced locally. But how many people will have the ability to access that? Because they're always in the north, in most instances. And so we need to find a way to bring it to the people as opposed to the people coming to it. I spoke with one manufacturer that had, I think what the UAE's Cocoa Expo, and there was a cocoa rum. And so, the challenge was that the laws are so archaic that it could not be produced here, so they had to go externally and produce this, and then we would become net importers of this new rum. So we really need to think about, and which is what I heard a lot of talk about, introducing the legislation, getting that legislative framework or wheel grinding. So that is what is needed, because a lot of what we operate within is quite archaic.
I think sometimes too we think about external market penetration, but not realizing that if we see a little more of it here, then that may go a long way as well. Because you talk about going to some of those craft markets, and then sometimes you ask the person, okay, well, where else are you so I can get this on a more regular or consistent basis? And they may tell you some places, and you might be shocked to know. Because when you go there and you actually look, you need to look around the corner, you need to look down on the floor, because these things don't have pride of place. But then again, that is something else that we can speak about.
And we have very, very creative people, very creative people. I mean, I bought a lamp from the same green market that was produced from a fancy bottle of wine with an Edison bulb. I mean, that to me was very, very creative. And the price I paid for it, I mean, when I compare to other prices, I mean, it was affordable. So we tend to need to now support the local producers, support the local designers, support the local manufacturers. Of course, we have been sort of trained and influenced by the desire for the imported goods. But I think there's a dissuasion there based on some of the limitations with the credit card usage and so on. So we need to really support local manufacturers. And I think that is where the education sector can play a critical role in sensitizing individuals and building that level of patriotism in individuals to really support local, buy local. You know, there was a huge movement at one time. Our manufacturing sector in the past, years gone by, was booming. Our garment and textile sector, manufacturing sector was booming. So we can get back to those days. We just have to harken back to what our sensibility is as a population.
And that was also a point in time where some of those things like the cloth, Claudia Peggers, they got a chance to operate a little more fulsomely because there was a vacuum created by actually saying, okay, well, you can't bring in these certain things into Trinidad and Tobago. But with that, you have closing arguments from you, please, Dr. Conrad. We have about 45 seconds.
Right. I would say that by and large, I would give a sort of a pretty good rating of the budget. The fiscal measures were pretty great, I thought, but of course I voiced some of my concerns. There was some talk about the environment. I think all of the various sectors were spoken to in a more meaningful way, in a well thought out way, but I now would hope moving forward that we don't suffer from what we suffered before from, which is an implementation deficit. We have no deficit of ideas and suggestions, no deficit, but we have an implementation deficit. And I would draw your attention to the Revenue Authority and how long we've been talking about that and where we are with that. So I would end my comments there.
All right, so we want to thank you so much, economist Dr. Darren Conrad, and we want to thank you for continuing to tune into TTT. We have more issues, more experts to continue this conversation on Budget Fiscal 2020, so stay with us on TTT Limited.